What's up, friends? Welcome back. What we're going to do today is 1984 movies, and what I've done is took the top grossing movies of the year and filtered out all of the sci-fi, fantasy, and horror. At first I had the horror separated, but I'm not a huge horror fan, so it was kind of pointless. So I just put all of the fantasy, horror stuff all together. So, top movies from 1984 in the sci-fi, horror, fantasy realm, I guess you could say. And ones that I found that are not actually on the top grossing movies list were things like Blood Simple, which was the first Coen Brothers movie. And I always wanted to see that because I love the Coen Brothers. But then I found out that it's a horror movie. Horror movies are usually the easiest movie to make as your first movie. So I kind of got less interested. And then I saw some clips of it and found out that it was more of a thriller than a horror movie, I guess you could say. So I still have not had a chance to see it. My dad, the bastard, found it on TCM one day, and he didn't save it for me, so I still haven't got to see Blood Simple, but it's on my want-to-do list. Like I said, I'm not a big horror fan. Friday the 13th 4, the final chapter, even though it ended up being only like halfway through the run of movies, had the biggest opening that Friday the 13th movie had up to that point. So, not Friday the 13th. Yeah, Friday the 13th. That's what I'm thinking of. I always get Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th mixed up. It's Freddy and Friday, I think. I don't know. Toxic Avengers was 1984, and that's a god-awful movie that a lot of people like because they like them be horror movies. I've seen parts of it. It's kind of cute in places. Company of Wolves was a movie directed by Neil Jordan, who had done The Crying Game and some other stuff. I think he's an Irish guy. But this Company of Wolves, I assume, is a werewolf movie. It's got Angela Lansbury and Terrence Stamp. And another that I think is a werewolf movie is called Monster Dog. And that movie is significant because besides being absolutely terrible, I think it's some spaghetti horror movie. It's like was made in Italy, and it stars Alice Cooper, and along with a lot of the albums that he made in the early part of the 80s. Alice Cooper says he doesn't remember making this movie at all, from drinking and what have you. And apparently it's really, really bad. Dungeon Master is a movie I saw way back in the day, and I had totally forgot about it until I saw this list. I always thought that was a Hellraiser movie because I remember a horror movie that had the band Wasp in it. And I didn't realize that Wasp had just come out that year. But it also has, as the big bad guy, Richard Mull, who's Bull Shannon on Night Court. And the reason Bull Shannon is bald on the Night Court is because Richard Mull had to shave his head for this movie. And there's your interesting little tidbit for the day. Also, Christine, which my frequent flyer actor bingo card guy, Harry Dean Stanton, is in that, and they thought that was going to be a big hit. They had already been having some big hits with other Stephen King movies from books turned into movies, and so they thought the new Stephen King book turned directly into a movie would be a surefire hit. And for some reason, people just did not flock to it. And speaking of Harry Dean Stanton, he was also in Repo Man with Emilio Estevez. That's on a lot of lists of counterculture, punk rock kind of movies. I saw quite a bit of that. I remember seeing that back in the day, and it's weird. It's got some sci-fi elements and some punk rock elements, and it's like they just really didn't know what they were wanting to do with that movie. I think it would have been bigger if they would have defined the tone a little better, but I don't think it would be as much of a cult classic as it is had they done that. And now we're into the list proper. 115, we had Chud, which for some reason that was one I remember seeing on HBO all the time, and totally stupid. It's got John Goodman and Patricia Richardson and John Hurd, who is an actor that I always feel like I know that name. And then I look him up and I'm like, I don't know who that is. And then I look at the list of movies he's in and I'm like, well, he's in like a half a dozen movies that I know, but he's just so normal looking. He just blends into the background. Probably his biggest, maybe not his biggest role, but the biggest movie that he's in is he's the dad in Home Alone, if that tells you anything. So, moving on, 104, we have Sheena, Tanya Roberts, after Beastmaster. She's one that really caused an awakening in me as a preteen boy, and I found Sheena years ago on DVD, and I watched it. They're not too careful about making sure she's covered up through a lot of that movie. She's not blatantly naked, but they didn't take too care to make sure she was covered up. So it's kind of a skin flick. I like it. Which it has to have something, because the acting is atrocious by the guys and by her. Oh, here's a big one. 101. Buckaroo Banzai Across the Eighth Dimension. Oh, that movie is such an important movie to me, and it's a cult classic now. Just like when I'm talking about some of the music, I don't know how to properly express how important a movie like that is. And in this day and age, it's almost utterly forgotten. There's been talks about remaking it for years, and I just wish they wouldn't. I don't want them to ruin it. Peter Weller, who went on to be RoboCop, is Buckaroo Banzai, and this movie is a live-action comic book, is what it is. There's just no other way to describe it. It's so campy and quotable. There's quotes all the way through it. Jeff Goldblum has some amazing lines. Clancy Brown is one of his sidekicks. He's a superhero, scientist, a rock star. I don't know what else he is, but he's a multi-hyphenate, I guess is what they call him. But of the most disparaging things that you can make a multi-hyphenate out of. uh, on stage, he goes, "No matter where you go, there you are." I love that. Oh, what else can I say about this movie? Ellen Barkin is the damsel in distress, and she's always cute as shit. Christopher Walken, Jonathan Banks, Vincent Schiavelli. I mentioned he's in about 40,000 movies in 1984. John Lithgow, another one that was in like 1,400 movies in 1984, is the most unhinged comic book bad guy ever. And it's crazy that he's in 1984, not to 1984, 2010, and Footloose, and all of the other movies that he's in this year, Terms of Endearment and everything. And then he plays this wacky character. I mean, you just got to see it to believe it. It's insane. I love this movie so much. The theme song is silly and fun. It went supposed to get a sequel. They announced a sequel at the end of the trailer. I mean, at the end of the credits, and never ended up getting a sequel because it went up against Star Trek 3 in its first week and was utterly destroyed, which is crazy because I'm surprised it even made it to 101 on the top grossing movies of the year. So it wasn't as big of a flop as some other stuff could have been. Next up, we move all the way up to number 81 for a movie called Cloak and Dagger, which I always wanted to see back in the day. It really intrigued me. It's got Henry Thomas from E.T., and he's in several movies in 1984. And his dad is played by Dabney Coleman, who just passed away a few months ago. And basically, he and his dad's a boring old businessman type of guy, and he's embarrassed of him being his dad, so he imagines him as this spy kind of guy. That's a cloak and dagger thing, and I think it's got some fantasy stuff in it. I don't know if, like I said, I've never seen it, so I just assume that he's either imagining that he's that, or his dad really is like some sort of superhero spy guy. I don't know. It always looked interesting to me. It might be a little silly nowadays, but as a kid in 1984, I'm sure that movie rocked. Then we move up to number 70, and a movie that I was unaware of called Dreamscape, with Dennis Quaid and Kate Capshaw, who was in Temple of Doom and apparently 100 other movies around that time. I always knew her as the Temple of Doom girl. A lot of these other movies I never knew about. She was in a lot of failures. Luckily, she got to marry Steven Spielberg, because I'm not sure how great of an actress she is, but maybe it was just how bad a movie she picked. But this movie had two of the greatest actors of all time in it, Christopher Plummer and Max von Sydow, who have both since passed away. But hate it when they're in a movie together, because I know them apart, but they're two of those actors that a lot of people confuse with each other, because they always play, they're the two guys that always play the old guy in a movie, the old wise guy, or the old guy. Anyway, moving on. Number 66, Supergirl. And I can't believe that made it to 66. I always was under the impression that that was a huge failure too. Obviously, they want a Superman spin-off movie to do better than 66, so maybe they just consider it a bomb because of that. Maybe it just costs more than what they made back, but Faye Dunaway's the bad guy, and Helen Slater is Supergirl, And she did some other stuff, nothing real huge, I don't think. 66 was a movie called Night of the Comet, and I always wanted to see that movie back in the day. And then I found out it was just kind of a doomsday. The comet comes and turns everybody into dust for some reason that they don't explain. But these two girls survive because they slept in the shed, and they weren't turned into dust because of the metal of the shed for some reason. And just seems really stupid and campy. But after watching some clips and reading a little more about it, it seemed kind of interesting. They did a pretty good job for a movie that had a $700,000 budget. One of the girls is Catherine Mary Stewart, who shows up in The Last Starfighter the same year. So she still does the rounds in the Comic-Cons and the Crypticons and those kind of convention things, as kind of a darling of sci-fi, and she's probably leaned into it a lot later too. I'm not sure what else she was ever in, but a couple other interesting fun facts about the Night of the Comet is the inspiration for one of the girls was Carol Lombard from one of my favorite movies with William Powell, My Man Godfrey, one of my favorite movies of all time, and ended up being somewhat of a blueprint that Josh Whedon used for Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So it's kind of a important cog in the lineage of those things. There's also a cool scene that was kind of an homage to Joan Crawford's Mildred Pierce in the old 40s movie Mildred Pierce. She slaps her daughter, and her daughter slaps her back and knocks her down. They kind of do it in reverse in this movie. Her mom slaps her, and then she slaps. No, it's the other way around. She slaps her mom, and her mom slaps her, and she falls down. So I thought that was kind of neat. Moving on, 64, Children of the Corn. That movie scared the crap out of me when I was a preteen. I saw that movie when it was relatively new, and it scared the crap out of me. And I didn't realize until doing the research for this list that was Linda Hamilton, the same year that she did Terminator. So that's kind of interesting. 61 is Firestarter with Drew Barrymore, and her dad is played by David Keith, who I always get confused because the white guy is David Keith, the black guy is Keith David. Why at the same time in history is there a guy named David Keith and a guy named Keith David? Just, the Matrix is screwed up. But I didn't realize that Firestarter I haven't seen since those times back then, that it had Heather Locklear in it and Martin Sheen. So Heather Locklear was working her butt off. She was in T.J. Hooker and Dynasty. Was it Dynasty or Dallas that she was in? And in some movies. So that's crazy. Number 54 is The Neverending Story, directed by Wolf Peterson, who, if you look at the list of movies that he's made, everything, I can't remember the other ones, like Das Boot, at least. And he always makes some hard-hitting, like, grungy, like, R-rated movies. And he wanted to make a movie that his kids could watch. So that's always inspiring. And The Never-Ending Story was traumatizing to me as a child. And it's supposed to be fun and light, but all of the best fantasy movies, my Mount Rushmore of fantasy movies is probably Never-Ending Story, The Labyrinth, The Dark Crystal, and maybe Legend, I guess. And all of them have super, super dark elements. When Atrax, what's the horse's name? Yeah, Atrax? That doesn't sound right. God, that was the saddest thing ever. And that little kid killed it watching trying to save his horse from the pits of sorrow or whatever it was called. I think that's from my God, I get so many things going on in my head at once. I mix up facts. Anyway, the best thing to come out of that movie was the theme song, The Never-Ending Story. Soundtrack, and that song was written by Giorgio Moroder, who, if you just try to connect points with that guy through history, and even in 1984, it's a crazy, crazy town. But it was sung by Limahl, who was from a band called Kajagoogoo. And they had kicked him out of the band after their big hit, Too Shy, and this is the only other thing that he did. So he's another one of those people that goes on the list of two one-hit wonders under two different names. And there's a girl singing on that song too, but she doesn't get any credit for it. You can find out who she is. I've read the name on Wikipedia, but she never did anything else other than that. So kind of sucks to be associated with a song that's kind of that important and not have any credit for it. Especially not have any compensation for it. I don't know. Moving on. Number 40 is Nightmare on Elm Street. Freddy Krueger, man. There's 1,000 video essays on YouTube that deep dive about everything about Nightmare on Elm Street and Freddy Krueger that I'm not even going to attempt to say anything about it. The only thing I'll have to say about the first Nightmare on Elm Street is that it is a proper slasher movie before they started Hollywoodizing it in all of the sequels and making him have all his quippy little one-liners. They found out that Freddy Krueger was a big icon. He became a big icon, so they started giving him more of a comedic one-liners and things. And the first movie was just straight up slasher. He just killed everybody. Oh, and the other thing is that it's got Johnny Depp. So it's Johnny Depp's first movie. So it's important because of that too. 31, Last Starfighter that I mentioned earlier. That's one that I definitely watched over and over and over again. It was on, it seemed like, all the time on HBO or Showtime, and I had the VHS of it, and I loved that movie. It's such a fun movie, and like I said, it has Catherine Mary Stewart is his girlfriend, and for every kid that grows up in a small town like I did, you just you always hope that something like that was real, to where you could just get discovered, plucked out of obscurity for some greater cause or whatever. Especially like wanting to be a rock star. I just thought, I don't know. I don't go down that road. The other thing about that movie is the start of the new wave of CGI video effects, and I think it was the first movie to actually have full CGI like sets and backgrounds and stuff, and the effects cost twice as much as the effects on the Terminator cost, if that tells you anything about it. Number 30 is John Carpenter's Starman. It's John Carpenter's take on sci-fi. Jeff Bridges comes down as an alien and as a spirit and embodies the body of the girl's dead boyfriend. So she freaks out when she sees him. And the girl is Karen Allen from Raiders of the Lost Ark. And I never saw that movie back in the day. I always thought it was a fun little sci-fi ride, but it's a little darker and little drier than I anticipated. I finally got to see it years later, and it's a great movie. But I'm glad I didn't see it back then, because I wouldn't have liked it as a little kid. Number 28 is Dune. And once again, YouTube is flooded with all kinds of video essays about Dune, so I will only talk about a few points. It was originally supposed to be directed by Ridley Scott, and he passed on it for some reason. I can't remember the movie he was going to do, but David Lynch turned down being able to direct Return of the Jedi to be able to do Dune. And as bizarre as this movie is, with David Lynch doing it, rest in peace, it was supposed to be even crazier. It was in development hell for years. There's a whole documentary, I think I talked about it on another video. Jodorowsky was a director in the 70s that had a whole book, and this book was passed around Hollywood for years and years and years, and he had all these big plans. At one time he wanted to make it 9 hours long, and he wanted to have everybody from Orson Welles to Mick Jagger to I can't even remember all the people. It was going to be just super expansive, and never ended up happening. There's a whole documentary, like I said, about it, about his version that never got made. There's enough to be said about the version that did get made. It was made on a grand scale. David Lynch swore that he would never let a studio interfere in another one of his productions because he was just in hell. Apparently there was 80 sets on 16 sound stages, and just tons of studio interference, just them telling him what he could and couldn't do, and he hated that, including the voiceover at the beginning and through different parts of it. He thought that he hated that. There's a whole string of people that were supposed to be in it at first. Obviously, we ended up with Kyle MacLachlan, his first movie, and kicked off a lifelong working relationship between Kyle MacLachlan and David Lynch. He's in Blue Velvet, and he's obviously in Twin Peaks and all of that. Sting, it was supposed to be somebody else in that role. I can't remember I write that down somewhere? I can't remember. It's the first CGI of a human form in their stupid little fight thing that they do. And it's blocky and clunky and not real good. It didn't really, 40 years later, it doesn't really hold up. But Max von Sydow again, Patrick Stewart, Virginia Madsen. The producer, Dino De Laurentiis, who, you look at the list of movies that he's produced, it's amazing. But they had so many shutdowns from either bad weather, shutting sets down for long periods of time, and illness because they were shooting in Mexico. And so there was all kinds of Montezuma's Revenge and food poisoning and everything going around, that there was just so much time lost. He had all the money in, however that works. They had all the money in the bank, and from the interest that they drew off of the money that was supposed to go to Dune, he was able to make Conan the Destroyer with the interest of that money. So that's kind of crazy. And so then next up, 27 is Conan the Destroyer. Not near as good as the first, Conan the Barbarian. Once again, they tried to cut back on the amount of blood and slaughter and all of that so they could get more Hollywoodized. And I think he kind of suffers for it. One fun fact amongst a million about that movie is the big monster that he fights at some point in there is played by Andre the Giant. And also Grace Jones has to be mentioned from that movie. She'll come up again in 1985, obviously, because of the James Bond movies and other stuff. So I want to get her going on the actor bingo card. Speaking of Arnold, number 21 is The Terminator. And I've watched hours and hours of video essays about The Terminator on YouTube, and they're all interesting. It's James Cameron's first big movie. His first movie was that stupid Piranha 2 or Piranha 3, and this is his first real big movie, his first baby. And actor bingo, Bill Paxton. It's his first movie. He plays one of the thugs at the beginning that tries to rob him when he first gets into Los Angeles from the future. Let's see. Lance Hendrickson is a big part of it. He was originally supposed to be the Terminator, and Arnold was gonna be Reese. But I don't know if he had to drop out or what, but it ended up getting flipped, and they moved Arnold to be the Terminator, and he kind of balked at being the bad guy at first. But just like with the Conan roles, his acting was okay, but he couldn't speak English as well. So it's better for him. He just did it perfect in these early movies, just picking roles that just boosted his success and his face out into the world without pushing what he could get away with as far as acting yet, because he was still learning. And Terminator, just possibly a perfect movie, I would say. One thing I learned was that the "I'll be back" line, probably the most famous line out of the whole movie, it was supposed to be I'll come back. And they changed it. And Arnold, I think, was right when he said, like, a computer wouldn't use a contraction. A computer would say, a machine would say, I will be back. And James Cameron apparently said, I won't tell you how to act, and you don't tell me how to write. And so it ended up being I'll be back, which is, I think, on the list of AFI's top quotes from a movie, but especially now that I know that background, I just think he's wrong about that. But originally, they were going to have O.J. Simpson play the Terminator, and James Cameron and their team vetoed that because they didn't think that O.J. Simpson would be believable as a cold-faced killer. So let that sink in. They were sued by sci-fi writer Harlan Ellison because he said he was too close to the story of his called Soldier of Tomorrow, which was an Outer Limits episode, I think. And apparently they settled out of court, and at the end of the movie now it's a special thanks acknowledgement to the work of Harlan Ellison. I've watched a bunch of stuff about him, and he was kind of a prick anyway, but let's see. My favorite video essay on YouTube about the Terminator, and they did one about Shawshank Redemption 2, is by a guy named Leighton Eversole. So it's the most in-depth video essay about the Terminator that I've ever seen. So if you're interested, go and watch that. There's lots of videos that talk about the timey-wimey, wibbly-wobbly stuff, and I don't really care about all that. It's the kind of movie that I'm not really trying to find holes in it, because if you start looking, they're big enough to drive a Mack truck through. So especially time travel movies, there's just no point in trying to poke holes in the plots, because they're gonna be there, and it's just gonna make you mad. So it's best to just turn off your brain. Terminator is a perfect movie if you just turn off your brain and enjoy it. I'm gonna do the top 20 of 1984 in its own list. So I just want to mention the sci-fi movies and kind of horror type of movies that were in the top 10. We have 2010. The I wouldn't even call it a sequel to 2001. The book by Arthur C. Clarke is a sequel to the book 2001 by Arthur C. Clarke, but I wouldn't call the movie 2010 a sequel to the Stanley Kubrick movie 2001. It's a completely different thing. If you love 2001, you'll probably enjoy 2010. If you don't like 2001, or you've never seen it and you like sci-fi, you will probably like 2010. It's a little bit of the fantasy stuff that's in 2001, but it's a whole lot more of like geopolitical type of stuff. And once again, John Lithgow, man, he was just everywhere that year. Star Trek, Search for Spock, third Star Trek movie, and apparently the The widely believed narrative is that the even Star Trek movies are the best, but apparently Search for Spock was, I mean, it's pretty good. I've got a box set that's got all of the Star Trek movies up to and through the new, not through, up through all of the next generation ones. And I like them all. This one has Spock in it the least because they're searching for Spock. So it's directed by Leonard Nimoy, which is kind of neat. Next we will have Gremlins, which I'll talk about in the top 20 a little more. Once again, there's a million video essays that do a lot better job than I can talking about some of these really popular ones. The third biggest movie of the year was Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. And the biggest fact that I like about that one is that it's the reason that the PG-13 rating was made. Because if you're anybody else, the ratings board just says, yeah, whatever. It gets an R. It's too violent for kids. But if you're Steven Spielberg, you can say, can we meet in the middle somewhere? So I don't know if it, in hindsight, got the PG-13 rating, but it may still be rated R. I'm not sure. I never really thought to look into that, but the first movie that actually got the PG-13 rating was Red Dawn. So, I don't know. The other one that caused... What the hell am I trying to say? Gremlins and Temple of Doom. Those are the two that caused the PG-13 rating. Can't remember if I didn't mention Gremlins, did I? And the number 2 biggest movie of the year, and I'll put that in sci-fi fantasy, even though it's more of a comedy, is Ghostbusters. Obviously, another near perfect movie. And I'll talk about that in a little more in depth in the top 20 video, but as far as that goes, that's all of the horror, sci-fi, and fantasy type movies that are in the top grossing. Man, it's easier to understand than to say it. I'm getting a little tired. I'm just going to be done, okay? I'll see you on the next video.